Welcome back, guys. And I just finished writing this article, and it's about to be published too. But I did want to say that if you haven't heard about it, there is a new Chrome extension called Dissenter that is based on Gab, and you can basically comment on any page on the internet, whether or not it has a comment section or not. So check it out if you're not on Gab. Check out Gab. I'm Starscream85 on Gab, at Starscream85 on Gab. And also please subscribe to me on Cocoscope and on, well, BitChute would be more important. And subscribe to me here and like this video. Bernie Sanders, why is there such a focus on this channel and on a lot of channels on Bernie Sanders? Well, you could say that he is just he's a lightning rod for attention, okay? The same way that Donald Trump is, the same way that Vladimir Putin might be. I'm not trying to associate them. It's the same way that a lot of these real icons are. Kanye West. You could talk about the Kardashians. At a certain point, people do attract a certain mystique to them. And while I haven't really ever seen myself as a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and I never would support him, yeah, he's a very interesting candidate. And the Bernie culture, the Bernie Sanders culture, is also pretty interesting when you look online. There's no culture to the campaigns of people like Amy Klobuchar or even somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who's pretty well known over the years. There's also, potentially Sherrod Brown could get into the race. That would be sort of interesting for somebody like me from his home state. But in the grand scheme of things, not that interesting. But I did write last year a number of articles exposing a major fake news issue concerning Bernie Sanders, actually concerning his supporters, where the media was trying to paint his supporters as these dupes of Russian interference. And to me, it really is, I have to say, irritating to see some people, that I thought would have kind of processed what happened in 2016 and said, you know what, the Democratic Party cannot be reformed. We can't find any sort of transparency through there. We should support candidates that work outside of the two-party system in order to help promote the ideas that we find important. Now, those aren't my ideas, and this article is not meant to be me dictating to progressives what's good for progressives, because I can't do that. I don't believe in what they think, right? So it doesn't matter in that respect. They don't have to listen to what I have to say regarding policies or whatever. The only thing I can do is illustrate that Bernie Sanders' history since 2016 indicates that he simply isn't the candidate that they supported back then. And that's why at the end I give kind of my suggestion. It's a suggestion. I'm not telling people what to do. So I would submit that since 2016, since July 9th, 2016, when Bernie Sanders officially endorsed Hillary Clinton, it was July 12th, 2016. He's been basically bought and paid for by a party establishment, and he's not going to really risk too much in order to reject some of the problems that they've been causing, in order to solve any of those problems that they've been causing. You see, Bernie Sanders in 2016 was out there as kind of this person who was impatient for the Democrats to fulfill some of the progressive ideas that they do have, okay? That is understandable given the Obama administration's drone strike programs, some of their issues on trade. I didn't even go into that concerning Tom Perez in this article, but, their support for the TPP, their taking of corporate PAC money, all of that stuff was a legitimate grievance by Bernie Sanders. And when he endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016, it was, in my mind, an acceptance on his part that the Democratic Party is not going to change he can just limit some of the damage from the right wing, which is what he sees as his real enemy, by supporting the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. Now, that's his choice, and he's made a Faustian bargain. But in doing so, he's really committed himself to allowing corruption to permeate the American political system. And long term, I want to warn you guys, if you think that allowing corruption to basically run buck wild in the American political system is okay because it stops Trump or it stops any other candidate, eventually you might get a candidate who makes Trump look just mild by comparison. You could have people. There are people out there already. They're trying to create movements that they'd be really, they would make the reality today look very, very rosy for those progressives that have a problem with the Trump administration. Okay, so Bernie Sanders could have, in 2016, just said to Hillary Clinton after he lost, look, I lost to you. That's it. I'm not going to be involved in this race anymore. Or he could have endorsed a third-party candidate. He could have mounted a third-party candidacy, but he didn't. And those hypotheticals are not really the subject of today. The real problem is that he never really stood up for his supporters after they were smeared as dupes for Russian interference. Okay, and this is something that I've written about for the Hard News several times. It's something I've harped on, and I'm not going to stop, and we're actually going to keep delving into this for the future. For those of you that don't know, we're going to continue to investigate this because I am not convinced that these shady creatures that went and infiltrated the Sanders campaign in 2016 and didn't get any consequences for it, weren't exposed on the national stage as they should have been, as I tried to have it done. I don't think that those people are going to go away. I think that they're going to be emboldened now. And in fact, I would make the hypothesis right now that these people would probably have an easier time because Bernie Sanders has basically yielded and become part of the same system that he was talking about taking down through a revolution. He called it a revolution, but in my opinion, it's become an adaptation. He's adapted to it. He's accepted it. And nothing could be more emblematic of that than his defense of Russiagate. We'll just listen to like the first minute or so of it. Just last year, after Trump met with Vladimir Putin, and I think it was in Helsinki, and Bernie starts to blow his stack.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about a matter of extraordinary importance to the future of American democracy and, in fact, democracies all over the world. At the Helsinki summit on Monday, President Trump embarrassed our country, undermined American values, and openly sided with Russia's authoritarian leader, Vladimir Putin, against the U.S. intelligence community's unanimous assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Senator John McCain is right when he said it was, and I quote, one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. The damage inflicted by President Trump's naivete, egotism, false equivalence, and sympathy for autocrats is difficult to calculate. But it is clear that the summit in Helsinki was a tragic mistake, end quote. That's not Bernie Sanders talking. That is former Republican presidential candidate, Senator John McCain. On Tuesday, after a strong international backlash, Trump, in a bizarre statement, claimed that he misspoke and of course blamed the media for reporting what he said. Even then, he could not help but suggest that the electoral interference, quote, could be other people also, end quote, and not just Russia.
All right, that's enough of that. You can see the rest of the video on the article. This is a disgrace, and for Bernie Sanders, who his entire career was a non-interventionist. I am a non-interventionist. It's not as if I've ever been a significant pro-war person. After all, I never really was into politics before about 4 or 5 years ago in terms of actually writing and I've never been an activist, that's for sure. So even if I ever supported war, I never really had a hand in it. I never voted for President Bush. I never voted for John McCain. I did vote for Mitt Romney, and I regretted it the day that I did it. So yeah, Bernie Sanders is basically taking a dump on his entire career by doing this. And he actually cited not just McCain, but Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats. And the fact is that Bernie Sanders has his entire career gone and done the exact same things and worse than Donald Trump was doing. Because as president of the U.S., Donald Trump's job is to go and meet with foreign leaders, whether it's Vladimir Putin, whether it's Angela Merkel, whether it's the president of Egypt, Sisi, and that's his job, to meet with them on an equal basis and discuss bilateral relations. That's his prerogative if he wants to go meet with Vladimir Putin. And if Sanders was to be president, if he was to be elected president, does he want to be subject to the same type of whistling from the galley every time he wants to initiate something? Because that could very well happen, because there's plenty of exhibits of Bernie's behavior when he was a private citizen, when he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, afterwards when he was a member of Congress and a senator. Bernie Sanders has coddled dictators his entire career, and that was his choice. And we allow people to make a choice in the United States to support foreign governments and, rhetorically, sometimes even have financial ties with them. It's worthy of criticism, but in Sanders' case, it wasn't illegal. He went to the Soviet Union and actually praised them only about 3 or 4 years before they fell apart, right? And just a year before the Berlin Wall fell, he goes to Russia and he basically sings their praises at a time when the relations were significantly more hazardous than they are now. Although we're getting back to a pretty dangerous point now. So yeah, this has to be something that you have to take into account. Bernie Sanders should realize that in the year 2019, we need to be doing our best to avoid conflict with Russia and cooperate with them on what we can. And possibly in the future, we could have a much better relation. I think it's better to have relationships with Russia than it is to have with a lot of the other countries around the world, And it doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive. You can have a good relationship with Russia and India at the same time, with Russia and China at the same time, with Russia and Germany at the same time. It's possible, because in the grand scheme of things, most world leaders acknowledge that the other countries in the world are always going to be there. It's actually an exception when you have some sort of lunatic that wants to take over the entire world and actually dedicates military force in order to do that. But that's not the point of today. And another thing, early in his career, in 1974, Sanders actually proposed abolishing the CIA. Now, I would say that now that the Cold War is over, that's not a very far-fetched idea. Okay, I don't think that the CIA necessarily serves the same purpose today as it did back during the Cold War. And the war on terror, I don't think the CIA has necessarily performed very well. Now, granted, there's always going to be a role for foreign espionage for the U.S. security structure. Anybody who's deluding themselves that we can live without an intelligence agency, whether it's the CIA or some sort of replacement. You're living you're living up there, in the clouds, along with Sam Kinison and Chris Farley, snorting on the great cocaine mountain in the sky. That's what you're doing, because you do need intelligence agencies. But Sanders, at the height of the Cold War, proposed abolishing the CIA. And this is just one of several examples of him displaying open sympathy to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Now, the Cold War is over, and I suppose Bernie Sanders can be forgiven now for, being on the wrong side of history, because I'm not one to say that people should be completely I would say he's discredited, okay? But that doesn't take away his rights to run for office. That doesn't take away his civil liberties. And he should still be able to run for president, even though, in my opinion, he doesn't deserve to be president, right? But he should bear in mind, when he makes a speech on the floor of the Senate attacking Donald Trump for selling out the country to Russia, Bernie, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So then there's a number of other points that I make here, including his pursuit of a Democratic nomination a second time around. This contradicts the same point that was made previous times, that Bernie Sanders was always saying for most of his career that the two-party system needs to be broken, that you do need third parties and independents in order to really bring change to the system. And if he does this, if he tries to campaign as a Democrat again, whether he wins or loses the nomination, and if he wins the presidency, then he has become a total pawn of the Democrats. And those that think otherwise, you have to realize he owes his entire power to them. Who would care about the vote of an independent senator for Vermont unless he can leverage that in order to give something to the Democrats, okay? Or if he were to so choose, which doesn't seem likely, he could throw some of his weight to the Republicans. But this is just him betraying his own principles. And the fact is that you go through the history of Bernie Sanders and the DNC, through the 2016 campaign. There was Debbie Wasserman Schultz leaking the questions to the Clinton campaign through Roland Martin, who still, by the way, is now whining day and night about why people don't get on board with Kamala Harris. The guy's basically bowing down and worshiping at her feet, kissing her ring. That's Roland Martin. So yeah, the DNC hasn't changed. They want their preferred candidate. They want Kamala Harris. And you have these clowns that think for some reason that the Democrats have changed because now Bernie Sanders is back. No, it's the same system. It's the same goal. It's the same prerogative. It's the same mission. It's the same transaction. That's the DNC, and they're not going to change unless they're forced to change, either by the Justice Department or by some sort of internal reform process that they didn't do. They haven't done it. And you can see that from the fact that the DNC chair election was really obviously slanted to Tom Perez, who was only put into the race because of Barack Obama. And that's not saying that I would want Keith Ellison, who was also a complete clown. But you have to remember this. They also had Sanders go on a unity tour in 2017 with Tom Perez, which was a complete joke because nobody wants to see Tom Perez. I think when he comes home at night to his family, his family says, Tom Perez, I was hoping that Richard Simmons would show up or some other random 80s celebrity. Maybe Mr. T. Why would we want, Tom Perez? I mean, they have to be disappointed in the guy. He looks just like a potato. But, in all seriousness, Tom Perez, who was the TPP guy as labor secretary. Tom Perez, who endorsed Governor Cuomo in New York after saying specifically that the DNC would not meddle in primaries. Tom Perez, who stripped a lot of these Democratic officials at the DNC level, who were, card-carrying progressives, and these are people I don't like, but who, this is the whole point. Bernie Sanders had these people who were on the DNC, like James Zogby and various other people that he was using in order to try to, quote unquote, change the party, and they were kicked out. So, the party's actually gotten less Bernie friendly, if you really want to think about it. They made him outreach chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus. What the hell does that even do? Nothing. And the real chair of that committee is Amy Klobuchar, who is actually his opponent in running for president right now. And she actually just runs the committee. It's not him. He's like the nominal chair. And yeah, the DNC continues to use super PACs. And then, of course, there's the Kavanaugh hearings. Let's not get deep into that because we don't have all night. But Bernie Sanders essentially was using the Kavanaugh hearings in order to, grandstand, say the same stuff about sexual assault as everybody else was saying, even though there was no evidence of it against Kavanaugh. I wasn't a fan of Kavanaugh. I thought he shouldn't have been nominated. I thought that his role in drafting the Patriot Act was a no deal for me. And I kind of wish that Trump had never nominated him. But in the process, because nobody wanted to bring up the Fourth Amendment, which there's this excellent video by Ben Swan on the 3 constitutional reasons why Kavanaugh shouldn't sit on the Supreme Court, and it's very short. Once they started this ridiculous campaign to talk about Christine Blasey Ford and these other people that were claiming suddenly years and years later that Brett Kavanaugh was some sort of unquenchable sexual beast of a predator. They never were able to place her anywhere. They were never able to confirm any of the events talked about. It was just it was one of the most ridiculous displays of theater that I've ever seen. And people shouldn't forget that. I certainly haven't forgotten that. If you're a progressive and you've forgotten that, it might be because you don't care about the presumption of innocence. But the presumption of innocence can help everybody. And the lack of it is something that everyone should worry about. So when Bernie Sanders didn't stand up for that, it, of course, came back to bite him in the ass. Because now there's this clip where somebody accuses him of ignoring sexual assault in his 2016 campaign. This is something that came up in early January. So Bernie Sanders can't complain now because the same type of innuendo and what do you call them? Assertions of guilt without any specifics that were used against Brett Kavanaugh can be used against him now, or not him, but people on his campaign.
We have a question from Shadi Nassab, a student at American University. Shadi's from Denver.
As we saw in the 2018 midterms, the Democratic Party has become more female, more racially diverse, and younger in age. How can a voter like me feel confident in your ability to represent the party, especially given that your response to sexual harassment allegations during your campaign is that you were, quote, a little bit busy running around the country trying to make the case to be elected as president?
Well, I think that quote was a little bit out of context. But let me ask you a question. I am enormously proud of the fact that we have the most diverse, progressive freshman class in the history of the United States Congress. And you know what I did in 2016 and in 2018? I ran all over this country to try to make that happen. All right, so when you talk...
Okay, Bernie kind of dissembles and doesn't really address that part of the question because he doesn't want to talk about sexual assault because the fact of the matter is that the question is nonsense because how can Bernie Sanders, who isn't even located in the same cities as some of these people that are experiencing this, what is he supposed to do? Get off of the plane while it's in mid-flight and smack away somebody's hand while it's groping a female intern or something. He can't do that. That's not, you don't run literally every aspect of a campaign. So I think Wolf Blitzer here goes in on him.
But what are you going to do, Senator, to make sure that the allegations that occurred against your campaign a couple of years ago are not repeated? What are you personally going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Let me tell you what we have done and what we are doing. I was very upset to learn what I learned. When I ran for re-election in Vermont in 2018, we instituted, I think, maybe the strongest protocols against sexual harassment, and that will be the protocols we bring into the 2020 presidential election. Every employee of mine in this campaign will get significant amounts of training to understand what sexual harassment is about. Anybody who feels harassed will have an independent entity to speak to outside of the campaign, and we have hired some of the best people in the country to help us on this issue. We take this issue very, very seriously.
How has it affected you personally, knowing what happened?
It was very painful, very painful.
All right, so I'm not going to completely beat him up for this, but his response when this story first came out should have been this. This is the way I would respond, but I don't have the same history as Bernie Sanders. I would say that if somebody was harassed by somebody on my campaign, they should have followed the standard. First of all, you go and report to whoever you can report, and second of all, you have to document this and bring as much evidence as you can. If something happened, this is a hard answer to give to some people, but if something happened to you and you can't prove it, then unfortunately you might have to accept the fact that you're not going to get the justice that you want. You're not going to get there's certain consequences that need a level of proof in order to happen. And that's not what seemed to be from the allegations given there. In fact, one of the allegations I think I remember was that somebody had walked in off the street in order to ask for a sign, and then he groped one of the Sanders volunteers. This wasn't even a person who was working on the campaign who was being accused. It was just some random person who was a Bernie supporter who came in off the street. That's not the responsibility of Bernie Sanders. It's not his responsibility any more than monitoring the Facebook group that was alleged to have been hacked by Russia last year they were talking about it, but back in 2016. And then you have people like, I don't have a photo of him here, but this what's his name, Fayez Shakir, and he's going to be the new what do you call it? The new campaign manager for the Sanders campaign. Now many people were, debating, I guess, for a while whether it would be Jeff Weaver, who's not very popular among some Bernie Sanders supporters because he seems to be a little bit more about building an institution as opposed to doing the revolution, whatever you want to call it. Well, those people who didn't want him, they got their wish. He's not going to be the campaign manager, but the person who will be the campaign manager is basically an acolyte of the Center for American Progress, which is the corporate Democratic think tank. And you can't you can't now say it's impossible to say that the Bernie Sanders campaign of 2020 is going to be the same grassroots vibe because the personnel are different. It's not just Weaver, by the way. A couple of the other major Bernie Sanders aides are leaving because I'm kind of making the assumption at the moment that they don't really want to work with Fayez Shakir, okay? Because Fayez Shakir is a person from the cloth of Nina Turner, Neera Tanden. He comes from basically the noble Democratic stock of today. Nancy Pelosi, he was an aide to her. Harry Reid, he was an aide to her. So the Bernie Sanders of 2020 is going to be a managed candidate who is basically being herded along by these DNC ghouls like, what's his name? Fayez Shakir. So, yeah, I think that this is going to be not a great election if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter. If you want him to do the things that you wanted him to do before, I don't think it's going to happen. Okay, I'm not like some of these people who, they make it a completely personal matter that this person is awful or whatever. I don't think you guys have to guess. I don't like Bernie Sanders. This isn't about me liking him or not. This is about observing the things that have happened, observing his behavior, observing the behavior of the DNC, observing certain, eventualities that have happened because, Bernie Sanders can't remain the same person. People do change. I've changed in the past couple of years. I think Tulsi Gabbard would be a good candidate. Okay, I would consider voting for her personally, and I'm not even a progressive. I think that she does have the skills in terms of her, her personal experience, her personality, also in terms of the policies she's proposing and her willingness to follow through on certain issues that she wants to promote. She did go to Syria to pursue an investigation of the chemical attacks, and that takes some courage that not all of us would do. Okay, I'm a Rand Paul supporter, but I personally I think she's about as respectable of a candidate as you can get. And there could be some other progressives getting in. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for or who not to vote for. But if it were me and I had to vote in the Democratic primary, if I had to vote, I would vote for Tulsi Gabbard because I think that she does have the personal integrity and the steadfastness to actually follow through on what she's talking about. So that's about it. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to me on Gab at Starscream85 and on BitChute, Chef Leopard. You can also find most of my social media links in the comment section below, not in the description anymore. And I'll talk to you guys later.